The red dust of Arizona territory hung thick in the morning air, painting everything the color of dried blood. Eleanor Whitcomb pressed a handkerchief to her nose as the stagecoach lurched over another rut, her stomach churning from more than just the rough ride. Through the window, she caught her first glimpse of Red Butte, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the base of crimson cliffs, looking more like a scab on the landscape than a town. Almost there, Miss. Old Isaiah called from the driver's seat, his voice carrying the weight of too many journeys across this unforgiving land. The former slave had been driving this route for 5 years now, and Eleanor wondered if he ever tired of ferrying Eastern brides to their Western futures. She didn't answer. What was there to say that she'd rather throw herself from the moving coach than marry Silas Crow? That her father's debts had sold her as surely as if she'd been put on an auction block, Eleanor Nell, as she'd insisted on being called since leaving Boston, kept her thoughts locked behind pressed lips. The town materialized slowly through the dust. First came the smell-horse sweat, sage, and something metallic that might have been blood from the slaughterhouse or iron from the new railroad construction. Then the sounds hammering from the blacksmiths, rough laughter from the saloon, and underneath it all, the constant whisper of wind through the canyon. Nell's fingers found the letter in her pocket, worn soft from handling. Her father's desperate scrawl still burned in her memory. The railroad consortium holds the notes, Mr. Crow has graciously offered to assume the debts in exchange for your hand. Without this arrangement, we lose everything. The stagecoach rolled to a stop outside the Broken Wheel Inn, and Nell forced herself to look at what would be her new world. Men in dust-caked clothing lounged outside the saloon across the street. A woman in a faded calico dress swept the boardwalk in front of the general store, pausing to shield her eyes as she studied the newcomer. Somewhere, a dog barked, the sound sharp in the thin air. "Welcome to Red Butte," a voice said. And Nell turned to find a woman with steel-gray hair and kind eyes extending a work-roughened hand. "I'm May Abernathy. I run the inn here. You must be Miss Whitcomb." Nell accepted the handshake, grateful for its firm warmth. "Eleanor or Nell, please." May's eyes crinkled. "Nell, it is. Come, let's get you out of this dust. Isaiah, bring her trunk round back. Would you—" Inside the inn, the air was cooler, scented with coffee and baking bread. May led Nell to a small but clean room overlooking the main street. "You'll stay here until the wedding," she said, then hesitated. "Mr. Crow asked me to tell you he'll call this evening, after you've had a chance to rest." Through the window, Nell watched a group of riders pass, moving with the easy grace of men born to the saddle. Among them, one figure stood out, a man whose bearing spoke of something different from the rough cowboys and miners who populated the town. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and he wore a mixture of traditional clothing and practical frontier gear. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting for a brief moment before he rode on. "That's Ashki Nez," May said quietly from behind her. "He scouts for the army sometimes, trades with the town. His people have grazed sheep in these parts since before any of us thought to put up fences." "His people?" "The Dana, what some call Navajo. They've got grazing grounds up near Chinley Ridge." May's voice carried a note of respect. "Good folks, mostly. Keep to themselves unless there's trouble." Nell wanted to ask what kind of trouble, but May was already bustling about, pointing out the wash basin and extra blankets. "Supper's at 6. I'll send up some water for washing. You rest now." Alone, Nell sank onto the bed, springs creaking under her weight. Through the thin walls, she could hear life-continuing footsteps, muffled conversations, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. This was to be her world now. No more Boston society, no more afternoon teas and piano recitals, just dust and wind and a marriage to a man she'd never met. She pulled out her father's letter again, and this time noticed something she'd missed before a postscript written in a shakier hand. Forgive me, Eleanor. The terms were not what they seemed. Be careful. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Whitcomb, Mr. Crow to see you. Nell smoothed her travel-worn dress and descended to the inn's small parlor. The man waiting there was not what she'd expected. Silas Crow was handsome in a sharp-edged way, like a well-made knife. His suit was Eastern cut but Western worn, and his smile didn't reach his pale eyes. Eleanor, he took her hand, his grip possessive rather than polite. Even prettier than your photograph. We'll deal well together, I think. Mr. Crow. She extracted her hand carefully. I trust my father explained the circumstances. Indeed. A fortunate arrangement for all concerned. He gestured for her to sit, then took the chair across from her, crossing one booted ankle over his knee. Your father's debts are considerable, but nothing I can't absorb. In return, I get a wife of good breeding to grace my home. The railroad is bringing prosperity to Red Butte, and I intend to be at the forefront of that change. And the wedding! Saturday next, the circuit preacher will be through then. His smile widened. No need for a long engagement, is there? Your reputation is safe here in May's capable hands, but tongues will wag if we wait too long. Nell forced herself to meet his gaze. Of course, I understand you're a man of business. Mr. Crow, perhaps you could tell me about your enterprises. His eyes sharpened with approval. Clever as well as beautiful, I own several ventures, cattle, mining interests, and recently, I've been working with the railroad consortium on the new line. Progress. Miss Whitcomb, that's what I'm bringing to this territory. And the local people, I understand there are indigenous communities here. Something flickered in his expression. The Indians, they'll adapt or move on. The railroad waits for no one. He stood abruptly. I'll leave you to settle in. Tomorrow. I'll show you the house. It's the finest in Red Butte, fitting for my bride. After he left, Nell remained in the parlor, her skin crawling as if she'd been touched by something unclean. May appeared with a tea tray, setting it down with a soft clink. Not what you expected, the older woman asked gently. Nell attempted a smile. I had no expectations. May poured the tea, steam rising between them. Well, if you need anything at all, you let me know. This inn has thick walls and loyal friends. That evening, Nell stood at her window watching the sun paint the cliffs the color of fresh blood. In the street below, she saw the native scout from earlier, Ashki Nez, speaking with old Isaiah near the stables. Their conversation seemed serious, with much gesturing toward the east where the railroad construction scarred the landscape. Deputy Hank Doyle, a young man who looked uncomfortable in his badge, approached them. Words were exchanged, and though Nell couldn't hear them, she saw Isaiah's shoulders slump and Ashki's jaw tighten. The deputy seemed apologetic, gesturing helplessly before walking away. As darkness fell over Red Butte, Nell unpacked her few belongings. At the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in tissue, lay her mother's wedding dress. She lifted it out, ivory silk spilling over her arms like water. Her mother had married for love, wearing this dress in a church filled with orange blossoms. Nell would wear it to marry a stranger in a town that smelled of dust and desperation. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness beyond the town limits, and Nell shivered despite the warmth trapped in her room. She folded the dress carefully and placed it back in the trunk. Saturday would come soon enough. Below her window, she heard voices, May speaking to someone in low, urgent tones. Saw the survey markers myself. That line cuts right through their water source. Nothing to be done about it. A man's voice replied, Deputy Doyle, she thought. Crow's got legal papers, federal authority. Legal doesn't make it right, Hank. I know that. You think I don't know that. But what can I do? I'm just a deputy. And Sheriff Morton takes his orders from Silas Crow, I know. Nell pressed closer to the window. but the voices faded as the speakers moved away. Survey markers, water sources, the railroad cutting through what? She thought of Ashkenaz's tight jaw, of Isaiah's slumped shoulders, of the postscript in her father's letter, "Be careful." What had her father gotten her into, and more importantly, what had Silas Crow hidden behind his talk of progress and prosperity? In the distance, thunder rumbled despite the clear sky. Nell had read about flash floods in the territory, how they could come from storms miles away, washing through the arroyos with deadly force. She wondered if other kinds of storms were gathering, and whether she'd survive what was coming. The wedding was 5 days away. 5 days to understand what web she'd been caught in, and whether there was any escape that wouldn't destroy her family completely. She reached for her journal and began to write, documenting everything she'd seen and heard. If nothing else, there should be a record. Some truths were too important to let dust bury them. Outside, Red Butte settled into uneasy sleep, while somewhere in the darkness, plans were being made that would change everything. The morning after her arrival, Nell woke to an unusual sound: rain drumming against her window. In Boston, rain was common enough, but here in the Arizona Territory, the locals treated it like a miracle. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find the inn's common room buzzing with excitement. "First rain in 3 months, May said, pouring coffee with a smile. "Lord knows we need it." Through the window, Nell watched the red earth turn to mud, small rivers forming in the wheel ruts of the main street. The rain fell in sheets, transforming the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. "Miss Whitcomb." Old Isaiah appeared in the doorway, water streaming from his hat. "Mr. Crow sent word. He'll be by this afternoon to show you the house, rain permitting." Nell nodded, but Isaiah lingered, shifting his weight. "Miss, if I might, be careful on the roads today. Flash floods come quick in these parts. Seen more than one soul swept away by water that wasn't there a minute before." After breakfast, Nell grew restless. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and the walls of the inn felt too close. She borrowed an oilcloth from May and ventured out, mud sucking at her boots with each step. The town looked different in the rain, softer somehow, the harsh edges blurred. She made her way toward the eastern edge of town, where the railroad construction had carved a raw wound in the earth. Through the downpour, she could see the wooden skeleton of a bridge spanning a usually dry arroyo. That's when she heard the rumbling. It started low, like distant thunder, but grew rapidly louder. Nell looked up the arroyo and felt her blood turn cold. A wall of brown water, 15 feet high and churning with debris, was racing down the channel. "The bridge!" someone shouted. "There's people on the bridge!" Nell ran forward, rain blinding her. On the partially constructed bridge, she could see workers scrambling for safety, but the water was coming too fast. She watched in horror as the flood slammed into the wooden supports, the entire structure groaning and swaying. Then she saw him, Ashkenaz, appearing from nowhere, racing along the rim of the arroyo on horseback. Without hesitation, he plunged down the steep bank, his horse sure-footed despite the treacherous conditions. He reached the bridge just as it began to collapse, grabbing a worker who'd been thrown into the churning water. Others were helping now. Ropes thrown from the banks, men forming human chains. Nell found herself holding onto May's fence post, reaching out to grab a young Mexican laborer's hand as he struggled in the current at the edge of the flood. Together with others, they pulled him to safety. The main surge passed in minutes, leaving destruction in its wake. The bridge was gone, scattered like matchsticks. In the chaos that followed, Nell found herself kneeling beside injured workers, tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said above her. She looked up to find Ashkenaz, soaked through, a gash on his forehead bleeding freely. "Neither should you, yet here we are," she replied, pressing a cloth to his wound. Up close, she could see the weariness in his dark eyes. the kind that came from too many battles fought and lost. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Isaiah's trapped, he said quietly. His wagon overturned near the wash. I'm going back. I'll come. No. His tone was firm, but not unkind. You've done enough. More than most would. He was gone before she could argue, disappearing back into the rain. Nell turned to find more injured, but movement near the destroyed bridge caught her eye. Several men in railroad company uniforms were pulling something from the mud, a wooden crate, marked with the railroad company's seal. Even from a distance, she could see it had been damaged, papers spilling out. One of the men she recognized him as one of Crow's associates, quickly gathered the papers, shooting glances around to see if anyone was watching. Nell pretended to be focused on helping an injured worker, but she memorized the man's face and the desperate way he shoved the documents inside his coat. Eleanor, Silas Crow's voice cut through the rain. He strode toward her, his face a mask of controlled fury. What in God's name are you doing here? Helping, she said simply, not backing down from his anger. He grabbed her arm, not gently. You're my fiancé. You don't belong in this mud with laborers, and he bit off whatever he was about to say, but his glance toward the native workers finished the sentence. People were dying. She pulled her arm free. I did what anyone would do. You did what a fool would do. His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You could have been killed. Then where would your family's debts be? The callousness of it, reducing her life to a ledger entry, made her stomach turn. Before she could respond, a commotion arose near the wash. Ashki had returned. Isaiah's limp form draped across his horse. He's alive. Someone called. Barely, but alive. In the confusion that followed, Nell watched Silas carefully. His eyes tracked Ashki with something darker than mere dislike. When the Navajo scout passed close by, carrying Isaiah to the makeshift medical station, Silas stepped deliberately into his path. This is what comes of building where we shouldn't, Ashki said quietly, not backing down. The old waterways don't care about your railroad. Progress demands sacrifice, Silas replied, something your people never understood. We understand plenty. We understand this wash has flooded every summer for 1,000 years. We understand your bridge was built on sacred burial ground. We understand. You understand nothing. Silas's hand moved to the gun at his hip. You're tolerated here because you're useful. Don't forget that. Deputy Doyle appeared then, nervous but determined. Mr. Crow, sir, we need to clear the area. There might be another surge. The moment passed, but Nell had seen enough. As Silas led her forcefully back to the inn, she noticed him signal to the man who'd retrieved the papers. They exchanged a meaningful look. Back at the inn, May helped her out of her ruined clothes. You did good today, the older woman said. Not many would have pitched in like that. Isaiah, will he be all right? Time will tell. That Ashki, he saved more than one life today. Yet men like Crow. May shook her head. Well, some things don't bear speaking aloud. That evening, as Nell sat by her window watching the rain finally slacken, old Isaiah's words came back to her. He'd tried to warn her about the floods, but what else had he been trying to say? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Nell? It was Isaiah's voice, weak but clear. She opened the door to find him propped on a makeshift crutch. His legs splinted. You should be resting. Had to speak to you, miss, while I still can. He glanced down the hallway nervously. That box them railroad men pulled from the mud, I seen what was in it. Survey maps, legal papers. They're planning to run that track right through Navajo grazing land, straight to their water source at Chinley Ridge. But surely there are laws. Laws made by men like Crow. Isaiah's voice was bitter. Miss, I helped drive that survey crew last month. Heard things I shouldn't. Crow's been filing false claims. saying that land is empty, unused, getting federal backing for a route that'll destroy the Dine's way of life. Nell felt the pieces clicking together. The papers from the flood. Evidence, proof of what he's doing, but they got them back. Isaiah gripped her hand with surprising strength. You seem like good people, Miss, but you don't know what kind of man you're marrying. He'll destroy anything in his path. After Isaiah left, Nell sat in the darkness, her mind racing. Outside, the storm was passing, but she felt like another one was just beginning. She pulled out her journal and began to write, documenting everything Isaiah had told her. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Nell quickly hid the journal and pretended to be mending her torn dress. The footsteps passed, but the message was clear. Walls had ears in Red Butte. The next morning, Silas arrived early, all smiles and solicitude. I apologize for my harshness yesterday, he said smoothly. I was concerned for your safety. Shall we visit the house? The rain has passed. Nell allowed him to help her into his carriage, playing the role of the compliant bride, but as they drove through the town, she noticed things she hadn't before: the way people stepped back from Silas's path, the fear mixed with resentment in their eyes. The house was indeed grand, a 2-story testament to new money and Eastern pretensions. But all Nell could think about as Silas showed her from room to room was that it had been built on others' misery. The wedding is in 4 days, he said as they stood in what would be her parlor. I've moved it up. The circuit preacher has to leave early. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Unless you have objections. She met his gaze steadily. None at all. But even as she spoke the words, Nell was planning. 4 days to find those papers again. 4 days to understand the full scope of Silas Crow's plans. 4 days to decide if she could live with being complicit in the destruction of an entire people, or if she had the courage to stop it. The flood had washed away more than just a bridge. It had revealed the rotten foundations everything in Red Butte was built on. And Eleanor Whitcomb, raised to be a proper Boston lady, was beginning to understand that sometimes propriety was just another word for cowardice. As Silas drove her back to the inn, Nell noticed Ashkenaz watching from the shadow of the blacksmith's shop. Their eyes met for just a moment, but in that glance, she saw he understood. The real storm was yet to come. The day after the flood, Nell found May in the kitchen before dawn, kneading bread with fierce concentration. Can't sleep either, the older woman asked without looking up. I need to thank him, Nell said simply. The man who saved Isaiah. May's hands stilled. That's not easily done. Child, Ashkenaz doesn't come to town often, and when he does, she wiped flour on her apron. But I know where he waters his horses. There's a spring about 2 miles north, near the Red Rocks. He passes there most mornings. Will you help me? May studied her carefully. I'll tell Silas you're feeling poorly. Need to rest before the wedding? But Nell, be careful. There are eyes everywhere in this town. An hour later, Nell rode out on one of May's gentle mares, the morning air cool against her face. The landscape opened up beyond the town, vast and humbling. She'd never felt so small, yet so strangely free. She found the spring easily, a ribbon of green in the red landscape. Cottonwoods providing precious shade. Ashke was already there, his horse drinking while he sat on a flat rock, working on what looked like a bridle. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Miss Whitcomb. Mr. Nez. She dismounted carefully, aware of how out of place she looked in her Eastern riding habit. I wanted to thank you for saving Isaiah. No thanks needed. He continued working the leather, his fingers sure and steady. Isaiah is a good man. Nell moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. He told me things about the railroad, about what's really happening here. Now Ashke looked up, his dark eyes searching her face. And what will you do with such knowledge? I don't know, she admitted, but I can't unknow it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No. Once eyes are opened, they resist closing again. They sat in silence for a moment, the spring gurgling between them. Finally, Nell asked, "The land, they want your people's grazing grounds. What will happen if the railroad takes it?" Ashki set down the bridle. "Come, I'll show you something." He led her up a narrow trail to a ridge overlooking the valley. From here, she could see for miles red earth stretching to purple mountains, cut by the silver thread of the river. "See there?" He pointed to a series of green patches. "Those are the seasonal pastures. My people move the sheep according to the grass and water, as we have for generations. Here," he indicated, "a narrow canyon is where we shelter during storms. And there, where your Mr. Crow wants his railroad, is the only reliable water source for 20 miles in dry seasons." "Can't the railroad go around?" "It could, but that would cost money. And the land around belongs to white ranchers who would fight. Easier to take from the Dine. We have no papers, no deeds, just the word of our grandfathers and the bones of our ancestors." Nell felt ashamed of her ignorance. "I'm sorry." "You didn't make this world." He turned to study her. "But you're marrying into it." "Not by choice." "There are always choices. Sometimes they're just between bad and worse." They made their way back down to the spring. As Nell prepared to leave, Ashki reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in soft leather. "For you," he said, handing it to her. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small knife with a handle of inlaid silver and turquoise. The blade was sharp, practical, but the craftsmanship was beautiful. "I can't—" "A woman should have means to protect herself." His expression was serious, even from those who claimed to protect her. Their fingers brushed as she took the knife, and Nell felt something electric pass between them. She quickly looked away, face warming. "How do you stand it?" she asked suddenly. "Knowing what's coming, seeing the destruction planned, and just enduring." "Who says I merely endure?" There was steel in his quiet voice. "There are ways to fight that don't involve guns, ways to resist that don't announce themselves." He showed her a simple hand signal, palm flat, moved across the body. "If you need to communicate but cannot speak safely, use this. It means danger. Be watchful." Nell practiced the motion until he nodded approval. "There are others who think as you're beginning to," he said. "Not many, but some. May, Isaiah. Even young Deputy Doyle wrestles with his conscience, though fear still wins most days. And you trust me, you don't know me. I know you stood in floodwater to save strangers. I know you seek truth when lies would be easier. That's enough to start." The sun was climbing higher. Nell knew she needed to return before her absence was noticed. As she mounted her horse, Ashki spoke again. "Your wedding is in 3 days." "Yes." "Much can happen in 3 days." She met his eyes, understanding passing between them. "Yes," she said again. "It can." The ride back seemed shorter, her mind full of new knowledge and dangerous possibilities. She was just entering town when she encountered Deputy Doyle on his rounds. "Miss Whitcomb." He touched his hat brim, then glanced around nervously. "Might I— that is, could I speak with you a moment?" She reined in her horse. "Of course, Deputy." "I saw you at the flood yesterday, helping." He fidgeted with his reins. "Not many would have done that, especially not—" He trailed off, reddening. "Especially not a pampered Eastern lady," Nell supplied with a wry smile. "I didn't mean—" "It's all right. Deputy, what did you want to tell me?" He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Be careful around Mr. Crow's office. He's been having meetings late at night. Railroad men, government types. And there's been talk of hiring more Pinkerton men. Rough sorts." "Why are you telling me this?" Doyle looked miserable. "Because what's happening isn't right, and I took an oath to uphold the law. Problem is, I'm not sure what the law is anymore when the men writing it are the same ones breaking it. Thank you for the warning, Nell said softly. It takes courage to speak up. Not enough courage. I'm afraid, not yet. He straightened in his saddle. Ma'am? Back at the inn, Nell found May waiting with a cup of tea and a worried expression. He's been here, she said without preamble. Silas asked where you were. What did you tell him? That you were resting in your room with a headache. But Nell, one of his men was watching the North Road. He might have seen you. Nell sipped the tea, thinking, May, I need to tell you something, but it could put you in danger. Child, I've been in danger since the day I opened my doors to all colors and creeds. Speak your mind. So Nell told her everything, Isaiah's revelations, the papers in the flood, her conversation with Ashki. May listened without interruption, her face grave. I've suspected as much, May said when Nell finished. The Dine have been good to this town, trading fairly, helping when needed, to drive them from their water. She shook her head. It's evil, plain and simple. But what can we do? The wedding is in 3 days. And once I'm married to him, once you're married, you'll have access to his house, his papers. May's eyes sharpened. A wife can go places others can't. You're suggesting I spy on my own husband. I'm suggesting you follow your conscience, whatever that leads to. That evening, Nell sat in a room. The knife Ashki had given her heavy in her hands. She turned it over, admiring the craftsmanship, thinking about the man who'd made it. Outside her window, the town settled into its nighttime rhythms, but she could sense an undercurrent of tension. Her journal lay open before her. She'd been documenting everything, but now she wondered if that was enough. Words on a page couldn't stop the railroad, couldn't protect the water source that meant life or death for the Dine. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She quickly hid the knife and journal before opening the door to find a young native woman, perhaps 17, with intelligent eyes and a cautious manner. You are the Eastern woman, the girl said in accented but clear English. I am Bikea. Ashki is my cousin. Please, come in. Nell glanced down the hallway before closing the door. Is something wrong? He sent me to warn you. The Pinkerton men arrived on the evening stage. 5 of them. They're asking questions about who was at the flood. Who saw the papers? Nell's blood chilled. Does Silas know? That you were at the spring today. Not yet, but secrets don't keep long in this place. Bikea moved to the window, checking the street below. Ashki says to be very careful now. Trust only May and Isaiah. And Deputy Doyle? Bikea shrugged. He wants to be good, but wanting and doing are different things. When pressure comes, many break. After the girl left, slipping away as quietly as she'd come, Nell sat in the darkness, feeling the walls closing in. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days to decide whether she would be complicit in destruction or risk everything to prevent it. She thought of her father's debts, of her family's reputation. Then she thought of green pastures turned to dust, of water sources diverted, of an entire people pushed from their ancestral lands. The knife lay cool in her palm, its weight both a comfort and a challenge. Ashki had said there were ways to fight without guns, ways to resist without announcement. Perhaps it was time to learn what those ways were. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, the sound lonely and wild. Nell touched the flat of the blade to her forehead, a promise to herself, perhaps, or a prayer to whatever spirits watched over this harsh and beautiful land. Tomorrow, she would begin to plan. Tonight, she would hold tight to the last of her innocence, knowing that once she chose her path, there would be no turning back. The moth had seen the flame and felt its heat. Now it had to decide whether to fly away or dance closer, even if it meant burning. The morning sun cast long shadows as Nell and old Isaiah rode out along the proposed railroad route. They'd left before dawn. telling May they were visiting the cemetery where Isaiah's wife was buried, a lie that sat heavy on Nell's conscience, even as she recognized its necessity. "Just ahead, miss," Isaiah said quietly, pointing to a series of wooden stakes driven into the red earth. "That's where they're marking the new line." Nell dismounted, studying the markers. They cut straight through a valley she recognized from Ashki's description, the winter grazing grounds. She pulled out her journal, sketching the positions quickly. "Isaiah, these stakes, they don't match the maps shown to the town council." "No, miss, they surely don't." The old man's face was grim. "The official maps show the railroad skirting the Navajo lands, but these markers tell a different story." They followed the line of stakes for another mile, Nell documenting everything. Near a cluster of ancient cottonwoods, they found something else, a camp of surveyors, apparently abandoned in haste. Papers lay scattered on a makeshift table, weighted down with rocks. "Keep watch," Nell whispered, moving toward the papers. Her hands shook as she lifted the first sheet, a land survey, stamped with an official seal, but the boundaries were wrong, showing huge swaths of Dine territory as unoccupied federal land. "Someone's coming," Isaiah hissed. Nell quickly folded several documents and tucked them inside her riding jacket, replacing them with blank sheets from her journal. They mounted their horses just as a group of riders appeared on the ridge. Well, Silas Crow's voice carried across the morning air like a whip crack. "What brings my bride-to-be so far from town?" Nell forced her voice to remain steady. "Isaiah was showing me where his wife is buried. I thought I should pay my respects, since he's been so kind to me." Silas rode closer, his pale eyes scanning her face. Behind him, she recognized 3 of the Pinkerton men, hands resting casually on their weapons. "The cemetery is 5 miles in the other direction," Silas said softly. "We got turned around." Isaiah spoke up. "My fault, Mr. Crow. Eyes aren't what they used to be." "Is that so?" Silas dismounted, walking slowly around Nell's horse. "And I suppose you didn't notice the survey camp either, or disturb any of the materials there?" "I don't know what you mean," Nell said, meeting his gaze directly. His hand shot out, grabbing her horse's bridle. "Let me be very clear, Eleanor, in 2 days, you'll be my wife. That means your loyalty belongs to me, not to old men with addled minds, not to savages who squat on valuable land, and certainly not to whatever misguided notions of justice you might have brought from Boston." "Let go of my horse." "Or what?" His smile was cold. "You'll run back east. Your father's creditors would love that. They've been very patient, waiting for our wedding. It would be a shame if they suddenly demanded payment in full." Nell felt the documents burning against her ribs, but kept her face calm. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Crow." "Good." He released the bridle. "Isaiah, you're fired from any work with my companies. And Eleanor, you'll return to town with me. Now." The ride back was tense, Silas keeping his horse close to hers. At the inn, he followed her inside, ignoring May's disapproving look. "Your sentimentality is touching," he said once they were alone in the parlor. "But it ends now. After we're married, you'll have new responsibilities. The right people to associate with, the right causes to support." "Of course," Nell murmured. "I'm hosting investors tomorrow night, railroad executives from Chicago. You'll attend as my fiancé." His tone brooked no argument. "Wear something appropriate. And Eleanor, no more morning rides. It's unseemly." After he left, Nell sagged against the wall. May appeared immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "What happened?" Nell pulled out the documents, hands trembling. "I found these evidence, but he knows something." May took the papers, her face paling as she read. "Dear God, they're claiming rights to thousands of acres, filing false homestead claims, forging signatures." She looked up. This is enough to bring federal investigators. But how do we get it to them? Silas is watching everything. Leave that to me, May said grimly. I have connections he doesn't know about. But Nell, if he suspects you have these… I know. Nell thought of the knife hidden in her room. I know exactly what he's capable of. That evening, Nell was writing in her journal when Hank Doyle knocked on her door. The deputy looked haggard, older than his years. Miss Whitcomb, I need to speak with you. She let him in, noting how he checked the hallway first. What's wrong? Everything. He slumped in the chair. Silas has given orders. After your wedding, there's to be a clearing action. The Pinkerton men, plus hired guns, they're going to force the Navajo families off the disputed land. When? Dawn, day after the wedding, while everyone's sleeping off the celebration. His voice was bitter. I'm supposed to deputize the lot of them, make it legal. And will you? Hank met her eyes, and she saw the war raging inside him. I took an oath to uphold the law, but what law, the one written in Washington, or the one written in human decency? Sometimes they're the same thing, Nell said softly. Sometimes we have to make them the same. He stood abruptly. I should go, but Miss Whitcomb, be careful tomorrow night. Those Chicago men Silas is bringing in, they're not just investors. Word is they have government connections, war contracts. This is bigger than just our town. After he left, Nell sat by her window, watching the stars appear over the desert. Tomorrow night she would smile and play hostess to men planning destruction. The day after, she would speak words binding her to a monster. And the morning after that, a soft sound made her turn. A piece of paper had been slipped under her door. She unfolded it to find a message in careful handwriting. The spring at dawn. Come alone. There are things you must know. Nell burned the note in her lamp flame, watching the ashes scatter. Through her window, she caught a glimpse of movement, Bikea disappearing into the shadows between buildings. That night, she made a decision. Retrieving the knife Ashki had given her, she used it to carefully open the lining of her corset. The stolen documents fit perfectly inside, pressed flat against the whalebone. Whatever happened in the next 2 days, the evidence would stay with her. She thought of Ashki's words. There are ways to fight that don't announce themselves. Perhaps that's what marriage to Silas would be, not surrender, but a different kind of battle. A wife could go places, see things, access documents that others couldn't. But first, she had to survive the wedding. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the desert. Another storm coming. Though whether it would bring destruction or cleansing rain remained to be seen. Nell touched the handle of the knife, drawing strength from its solid presence. 2 days, 48 hours to prevent a massacre, expose a conspiracy, and somehow find a way to live with the choices she was about to make. Through the thin walls, she heard May singing softly in the kitchen an old hymn about crossing Jordan's waters. Nell didn't believe much in signs, but she couldn't help wondering if some rivers, once crossed, changed you forever. Tomorrow at dawn, she would meet Ashki one last time. Whatever he had to tell her, whatever plan he might propose, she would listen, because the alternative, standing by while innocent people were driven from their lands, was no alternative at all. She lay down fully dressed, the knife within reach, the documents pressed against her heart, outside. Red Butte slept uneasily, as if the very earth sensed the violence planned in boardrooms and handshake deals. But the earth had its own justice, slow and inexorable as water-carving stone, and sometimes, Nell thought as sleep finally claimed her, it chose unlikely instruments to work its will. Tomorrow would tell if she was strong enough to be one of them. The night before her wedding, Nell lay awake listening to the sounds of preparation below. May and Isaiah moved quietly through the inn, their whispered conversations too low to understand. At 3 a.m, when the town was deepest in sleep, she rose and dressed in her plainest clothes. The back stairs creaked despite her care. In the kitchen, May waited with a bundle of food and a dark shawl. "Isaiah's watching the front," May whispered. "Silas has men posted, but there's a way through the old mine shaft that lets out past the cemetery. Bikea will meet you there." Nell squeezed the older woman's hands. "If I don't come back—" "You will! You must! Now go!" The escape through the mine shaft was harrowing. The darkness absolute, except for the small lantern Bikea carried. They emerged into moonlight a mile from town, where horses waited. "We must hurry," Bikea said. "Dawn comes soon." They rode hard across the desert, the stars wheeling overhead. Nell's wedding dress lay across her bed at the inn, a ghost of the life she was abandoning. By the time they reached the spring, the eastern sky showed the faintest blush of color. Ashki stood by the water, his silhouette dark against the growing light. "You came." "I couldn't marry him," Nell said simply. Not knowing what follows, "No, you couldn't." He stepped closer, and she saw the grim set of his face. "There's something else. The investors Silas brought, they've already signed contracts, not just for the railroad, but for what comes after. They plan to dam the river upstream, sell water rights to mining companies. My people won't just lose grazing land. We'll lose everything." The words hit Nell like physical blows. She pulled out the documents she'd hidden in her corset, spreading them on a flat rock. "These prove the land grab, but nothing about water rights." "Because those papers are in Silas's private safe." Ashki's eyes met hers. "In the house where you would have lived as his wife." The full weight of her decision crashed over her. By running, she'd lost any chance of accessing those documents. "I'm sorry, I've failed." "No," his voice was firm. "You've chosen truth over comfort. That's not failure." The sun broke the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. In that moment of transformation, Nell felt something break inside her, all the careful walls built by years of proper upbringing, social expectations, the weight of being her father's daughter. She walked to the spring's edge and began pulling at the buttons of her dress. "Turn around." Ashki obeyed without question. Nell stripped away the layers of Eastern propriety, the corset with its hidden documents, the petticoats, the carefully mended stockings. She waded into the cold water, gasping at the shock, and scrubbed herself clean of Red Butte's dust and Silas Crow's touch. When she emerged, her traveling dress was soaked and clinging. She stood shivering in the dawn light, water streaming from her hair, feeling more naked than if she'd worn nothing at all. Naked of pretense, of social armor, of everything but her essential self. Ashki still turned away, held out a rough wool blanket. She wrapped it around herself, teeth chattering from cold and adrenaline. "Take me with you," she said, the words bursting out before she could stop them. "Please, I have nowhere else. I can't go back." He turned then, his face unreadable. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know I'm asking for my life." Her voice grew stronger. "The life I choose, not the one chosen for me. I know it means hardship, danger, being caught between two worlds, but the alternative is a kind of death." "My people may not accept you." "I'll earn their trust." "Silas will hunt you, hunt us both. Then we'll face that together." She stepped closer, still shivering despite the blanket. "Or do you think I'm too weak, too Eastern, too white, too—" "No." The word was soft but definite. He reached out, his hands gentle as he adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "I think you're the bravest woman I've ever known, also the most foolish." "They're often the same thing." That drew a small smile from him. "Yes, they are." Bikea, who had been keeping watch, called out softly in Navajo. Ashki's expression sharpened. "Riders coming. We need to go." He helped Nell onto his horse, swinging up behind her. The intimacy of it, his arms around her to hold the reins. The solid warmth of his chest against her back would have scandalized Boston society. But Boston was a world away, and getting farther with each heartbeat. They rode hard toward the canyons, Bikea leading the way. behind them. Nell could hear shouts as the search party found their trail. Ashki guided the horse up increasingly treacherous paths, the town falling away below them. There, he pointed to a narrow crack in the rock face. We go on foot from here. They abandoned the horses, knowing they'd find their way home. The crack led to a hidden canyon, its walls soaring hundreds of feet overhead. Ancient ruins dotted the cliff sides, the old ones, Ashki explained, who had lived here long before. We'll be safe for a time, he said. But Nell— Eleanor, she corrected. My mother called me Eleanor. Nell was the woman who was going to marry Silas Crow. Eleanor— he tested the name carefully. You must understand this choice can't be undone. If you stay with my people, learn our ways, there's no going back to your old life. I know. She pulled the blanket tighter, meeting his eyes. That's why I'm here. They made camp in one of the ancient dwellings, stone walls that had stood for centuries providing shelter. Bikea produced food from her packed dried meat, flatbread, water in a skin bag. As they ate, Ashki spread out a different set of documents. These are the real survey maps, he said, drawn by my grandfather, passed down. They show every water source, every sacred site, every seasonal camp for the past 100 years. If we can get these to the right authorities, prove our presence. We need more than presence, Eleanor said, thinking quickly. We need legal precedent, treaty rights, and we need those water contracts from Silas's safe, which we can no longer access. Maybe, she looked at them both. But May and Isaiah are still there, and Deputy Doyle. She paused, remembering his tortured conscience. What if the wedding still happened? Ashki's face darkened. You would go back after. Not me, but everyone expects a bride, veiled, silent during the ceremony. She turned to Bikea. You're about my height. Understanding dawned in the girl's eyes. A decoy. While the town watches a false wedding, someone could search the house, Eleanor finished. May has keys she cleaned for Silas before I arrived. And if Hank Doyle chose his conscience over his fear, it's dangerous. Ashki said, if they're discovered, everything's dangerous now. Eleanor stood, the blanket falling away. But we have something Silas doesn't expect, people willing to risk everything for justice. The sun climbed higher, warming the ancient stones. In the distance, they could hear search parties calling, but the sound was fading. They'd lost the trail. There's a way to send messages, Ashki said finally. Smoke signals. My cousin can reach May by nightfall. As Bikea prepared the signal fire, Ashki and Eleanor sat in the shade of the ruins. The magnitude of what she'd done, what they were planning, should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange peace. No regrets, he asked quietly. None. She looked at him. This man who'd shown her a different way of seeing the world. Whatever happens, I chose it. That's more than most women get. Most people, he corrected. Choice is rare for anyone born without power. Then we'll make our own power. She touched the documents spread between them. With truth, with courage, with— She hesitated, then plunged ahead. With whatever this is between us. He was quiet for a long moment. You feel it too. From the moment you pulled Isaiah from the flood. Maybe before. She laughed, short and sharp. My mother would be horrified. Falling for a savage, she'd say— And my grandmother would say I'm a fool for trusting a white woman. His hand covered hers. Perhaps we're both fools. Perhaps that's what the world needs. More fools willing to see past what they're told to hate. The signal fire sent its message skyward. By sunset, they'd have their answer whether May and the others would risk the desperate plan. By dawn, Silas would either have his bride or discover the deception. Eleanor sat in the ruins of the old ones, wrapped in a rough blanket. her hair drying in wild curls, and felt more herself than she'd ever been in silk and propriety. She'd asked to be taken along, and Ashki had given her more a chance to fight for something worth believing in. The naked white bride of the dawn had been reborn as something harder and more honest. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but today she was free. The dust storm hit just before dawn, turning the sky an ominous yellow-brown. Eleanor pressed a cloth to her face as she, Ashki, Isaiah, and Hank Doyle crept toward the railroad construction site. May had sent word through Bikea the false wedding had worked, Silas discovering the deception only after the supposed bride had fainted at the altar and been carried away. Her veil never lifted. In his rage, Silas had advanced his plans. The railroad crews were already laying track through Dineland, and worse, he'd ordered explosives placed along the riverbank to redirect the water flow. "There," Hank whispered, pointing through the swirling dust. "The supply shed. That's where they're keeping the dynamite." Eleanor's heart pounded. In the 2 days since her escape, she'd barely recognized herself dressed now in men's clothing Ashki had found, her hair braided and hidden under a hat, the knife he'd given her strapped to her belt. The documents from Silas's safe, retrieved by May during the chaos of the false wedding, were secured in oilcloth inside her shirt. "Remember the plan," Ashki said quietly. "Isaiah and Hank create a distraction at the main camp. Eleanor and I disable the explosives. We meet at Skull Rock when it's done." They split up, the storm providing perfect cover. Eleanor followed Ashki through the maze of construction equipment, her heart hammering. They reached the explosives shed to find it guarded by 2 Pinkerton men, barely visible through the dust. Ashki moved like a shadow. Before Eleanor could react, both guards were unconscious, taken down with swift, silent efficiency. He picked the lock with tools she hadn't known he carried. Inside, crates of dynamite were stacked alongside coils of fuse. But it was the papers on the crude desk that made Eleanor gasp, detailed plans showing not just the river diversion, but a series of accidents planned to drive out the remaining Navajo families. Fires, poisoned water sources, staged attacks to be blamed on Apache raiders. "Monster," she breathed, stuffing the papers inside her shirt with the others. "Eleanor," Ashki's voice was urgent. "The fuses they're already cut and prepared. They plan to blow the riverbank today." They worked frantically, cutting fuses, soaking the dynamite with water from their canteens. Outside, they could hear shouts. Isaiah and Hank's distraction was working, drawing men away from the explosives. That's when Eleanor saw a secondary cache, hidden under a tarp. "Ashki, there's more." The shed door burst open. Silas stood there, a rifle in his hands, his face twisted with fury. "You!" he snarled at Eleanor. "I should have known." "Drop the weapon," Ashki said calmly, his own rifle suddenly in his hands. "The savage speaks." Silas's laugh was ugly. "Do you know what she is? Indian she's mine, bought and paid for with her father's debts." "I belong to no one," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "And these documents prove what you really are, a thief and a murderer." "Documents," Silas's eyes glittered. "What documents?" Eleanor pulled out the papers, holding them up. "The real contracts, the ones showing you've been defrauding the government, filing false claims, planning mass murder." Silas moved faster than she expected, lunging forward. The rifle went off, the sound deafening in the small space. Eleanor felt the bullet whistle past her ear as she dove sideways, her hand finding the knife at her belt. Ashki and Silas grappled for the rifle. In the chaos, Eleanor saw her chance, the long fuse leading to the secondary explosives if that went off. It would destroy half the camp and kill dozens of innocent workers. She ran for it, knife in hand. Behind her, she heard the struggle continue. Furniture crashing. The fuse was already lit, sparking its way toward disaster. Eleanor dropped to her knees, sawing at it with desperate strokes. The knife cut through just as rough hands seized her shoulders. One of Silas's men, blood streaming from a gash on his head. Isaiah's work, she guessed. They rolled in the dirt. Eleanor fighting with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. Then Hank was there, his deputy's badge catching the weird stormlight as he pulled the man off her. "Go!" he shouted. "Both of you. Get to the judge. I've got men willing to testify, but we need those documents safe." Eleanor scrambled up to see Ashki emerging from the shed, Silas's rifle in his hands. Silas himself stumbled out after, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're finished, Crow," Hank said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I've got witnesses. Half your own men are ready to turn. It's over." "Nothing's over," Silas snarled. "I own this town, I own the law." "Not anymore," said a new voice. May Abernathy emerged from the dust, a shotgun in her hands, and Sheriff Morton beside her, but the sheriff's hands were shackled. "Turns out Sheriff Morton here has been taking bribes for years. The federal marshal in Tucson is very interested in that information." More figures emerged from the stormed townspeople, some of Silas's own workers, even several Navajo men who'd been watching from the ridges. The truth had drawn them like water in the desert, and they formed a circle around Silas and his remaining supporters. "You need to see this," Eleanor said, her voice carrying over the wind. She held up the papers. "He wasn't just stealing land. He was planning to poison water sources, to burn families out, to commit murder and blame it on others." A murmur ran through the crowd, anger building like thunder. Silas looked around wildly, seeing his empire crumbling. "The railroad will still come," he said desperately. "You can't stop progress." "Progress doesn't require genocide," Ashki said quietly. "The railroad can go around. It will cost more, but it can be done. These papers prove it." The storm was beginning to break, dust settling to reveal the full scope of the confrontation. Federal marshals, summoned by May's urgent telegrams, rode into view. Behind them came something unexpected: reporters from Eastern newspapers, drawn by rumors of scandal. "In Mr. Silas Crow," the lead marshal announced. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and violation of federal treaty obligations." As they led Silas away, he turned to Eleanor one last time. "You could have had everything," he spat. "Fine houses, servants, respectability." "I have everything," she replied calmly. "I have my freedom." The crowd began to disperse. The immediate danger passed, but there was still work to do: testimony to give, documents to file, truth to spread before powerful interests could bury it again. Eleanor found herself standing beside Ashki as the sun broke through the dissipating dust clouds. They were both filthy, exhausted, bloodied from the fight, but alive. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make sure this sticks. The papers need to reach Washington. The story needs to be told." He looked at her, something soft in his eyes despite the hardness of the morning. "You could go back east. Your part is done. No one would blame you." "I'm not going anywhere," Eleanor said firmly. "This is my fight now too, our fight." Isaiah approached. Supported by Hank, the old man was grinning despite a spectacular black eye. "Did you hear some of Crow's own investors are switching sides? Seems they don't want their names associated with mass murder. Funny how that works." May joined them, her shotgun still in hand. "The judge is on his way from Tucson. Real judge, not one of Silas's puppets. We'll need everyone's testimony." As they talked, planning next steps, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Boston: hope. Not the false hope of escape through marriage or the desperate hope of survival, but real hope for justice, for change, for a future built on truth rather than lies. The railroad would still come, that was inevitable, but it would come on different terms, respecting existing rights, paying fair prices, going around sacred sites and crucial water sources. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And sometimes, better was all you could fight for. You know they'll try again, Ashki warned. Other men like Silas, other schemes. Then we'll fight again, Eleanor said simply. As many times as it takes. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the dust. In the distance, she could see Navajo families emerging from hiding, returning to lands they'd been told to abandon. Children ran alongside sheep, their laughter carrying on the clean wind. It wasn't the end, it was barely the beginning. There would be trials, testimonies, battles in courtrooms instead of construction sites. There would be those who resented a woman, an outsider, taking such a prominent role. There would be danger still. But standing there in the morning light, surrounded by allies who'd risked everything for justice, Eleanor felt ready for whatever came next. She'd been reborn in that dawn by the spring, and this was her baptism by fire. The naked vulnerability of that morning had been transformed into something stronger, not despite her choice to stand with Ashki and his people, but because of it. She'd found her place, her purpose, her own peculiar form of power, and she would use it every day to keep the promises made in dust and conflict. The West was still wild, still dangerous, still full of men who would take what wasn't theirs, but it was also full of those willing to stand against them. Eleanor touched the handle of the knife at her belt, no longer just a gift, but a reminder. Sometimes the greatest courage was in choosing to stay and fight, even when running would be easier, especially then. The courtroom in Tucson was stifling, even with the windows thrown open to catch any hint of breeze. Eleanor sat in the witness chair, her back straight despite the sweat gathering under her simple cotton dress. 3 weeks had passed since Silas's arrest. 3 weeks of depositions and evidence gathering and threats from his remaining supporters. Miss Whitcomb, the federal prosecutor continued, you've told us about the false documents, the planned violence, but can you explain to the court why we should believe someone who fled her own wedding? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Because I chose truth over comfort, sir, and because I have proof. She gestured to the evidence table, where the documents lay in neat stacks. Those papers speak louder than any marriage vow obtained through coercion. In the gallery, she could see Ashki watching, his presence both comforting and complicated. They'd barely spoken since the confrontation at the railroad site, the legal proceedings consuming every waking hour, but his steady gaze reminded her why she was here. The judge, an elderly man with keen eyes, leaned forward. Mr. Crow, you may cross-examine. Silas rose, his arm still in a sling from their fight. His lawyer had argued for a delay, but the federal marshals were eager to close this case before more powerful interests could intervene. Miss Whitcomb. Silas began, his voice dripping false concern. Isn't it true you've been living among the savages since you abandoned your obligations? I've been staying with the Abernathy Inn, Eleanor replied calmly, though the lie burned her throat. In truth, she'd spent several nights in the Navajo camps, learning, listening, documenting their stories for the court, but admitting that would only fuel Silas's narrative. And this sudden concern for the Indians, did it perhaps begin when you met a certain attractive scout? Objection, the prosecutor called. Relevance. Goes to the witness's motivations, Your Honor. Silas's lawyer interjected. The judge nodded slowly. I'll allow it, but tread carefully. Mr. Crow. Eleanor straightened. My concern began when I learned of your plans to poison water sources and blame it on Apache raiders. My concern grew when I saw maps showing you'd filed claims on land already occupied by families who've been there for generations. My concern... Families of savages, Silas interrupted. Your Honor, this woman has been corrupted, turned against her own kind. Mr. Crow, the judge's voice was sharp. You will maintain decorum or be removed from your own trial. The rest of Eleanor's testimony went smoothly, each document authenticated, each claim supported by evidence. When she finally stepped down, her legs were shaking, but she'd done what she came to do. Outside the courthouse, May waited with a pitcher of cool water. "You did good, child. Real good." "It's not over yet." Eleanor accepted the water gratefully. Silas still has supporters, and the Railroad Consortium is reconsidering their route. Hank Doyle approached, still wearing his deputy's badge, but standing taller these days. "Word came in this morning. They're negotiating with the tribal leaders for a southern route that avoids the water sources." "At what cost?" "Fair market value, apparently. Turns out public scandal is bad for stock prices." His grin was wry. Who knew? That evening, Eleanor walked to the edge of town where the desert began. She'd received a letter that morning, her first contact from Boston since fleeing the wedding. Her hands shook as she opened it again. Asterisk, Eleanor. Your father passed 2 days after receiving word of your situation. The doctors said his heart gave out, but I believe it was shame. The creditors have taken everything. Do not attempt to return. You are no daughter of mine. Your mother, asterisk. She'd read it 3 times, each word a knife between her ribs. Orphaned, disowned, cast out from the world she'd known. The proper response would be tears, but all she felt was a hollow ache. "Bad news." Ashki's voice came from behind her. She turned, not surprised he'd found her. He moved like the desert itself, quiet, patient, always present, even when unseen. "My father is dead. My mother has disowned me." She held out the letter. "I'm officially nobody now." He read it quickly, then handed it back. "You're Eleanor Whitcomb, the woman who stood against Silas Crow, who saved lives, who chose justice over safety. That's not nobody." "It's not anybody either, not in the world I came from." "Then be someone in this world." He gestured to the vast landscape. "The desert doesn't care about your bloodline or your mother's approval. It only cares if you're strong enough to survive." They stood in silence, watching the sun paint the mountains crimson. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "The trial will end soon. Silas will go to prison. The railroad will reroute. Things will settle. What then? What do you want?" She laughed, short and bitter. "I wanted to be free. I wanted justice. We're getting it. Now. I don't know. I can't go back east. I don't belong here. I'm just floating." "The trading post at Cedar Ridge needs someone who can read and write, keep accounts, deal with both white traders and native families." His voice was carefully neutral. "May mentioned you might be interested. Is that what you want, for me to disappear into the desert, keeping ledgers?" "I want you to stop running from what's between us." The words fell heavy in the cooling air. "But I also want you to choose it freely, not because you have nowhere else to go." Eleanor turned to face him fully. These past weeks, she'd pushed down every feeling that wasn't about the trial, the evidence, the fight. Now it all came rushing back, the moment by the spring, his hands gentle on the blanket around her shoulders, the way he'd fought beside her. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "In my world, there were rules, courtship rituals, proper channels. This," she gestured between them, "this has no roadmap. Then we make our own." He stepped closer. "If you want to. Your people have seen you stand for them, fight for them. That matters more than blood." He paused. "Though there will be those who disagree. There always are." "And you, what do you want?" His hand found hers, calloused and warm. "I want to wake up beside you and not wonder if you'll disappear with the morning light. I want to show you the hidden springs, the ancient places, the stars from the high mesas. I want—" He stopped, struggling with words. "I want you to stay because this is home, not because you have nowhere else." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Give me time to finish this trial, to mourn what I've lost, even if it was a cage, to be sure I'm choosing from strength, not desperation. Time we have." He raised her hand to his lips. the gesture both foreign and achingly familiar. The desert teaches patience. They walked back to town together as stars began to appear. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more battles in the courtroom. Silas's lawyers would attack her character, her motives, her choices. The Eastern newspapers would paint her as either a hero or a fallen woman, depending on their politics. But tonight, she walked beside a man who saw her truly, in a land that demanded authenticity over artifice. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but perhaps that was the point. The best lives rarely were. At the inn, Isaiah sat on the porch, whittling in the lamplight. "Miss Eleanor," he called. "Got something for you." He handed her a small wooden figure, a woman standing tall, arms outstretched, face turned toward an unseen horizon. Figured you needed a reminder of who you are when nobody's watching. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Thank you, Isaiah." "No, miss, thank you. My grandchildren will grow up free because of what you done. That's worth more than all the gold in California." Inside, May had kept supper warm. The common room was full of people witnesses for tomorrow's proceedings. Journalists scribbling notes. Local folks come to see history made. But May had saved Eleanor's usual corner table, quiet and half-hidden. "Eat," May commanded. "Tomorrow's going to be harder. Silas's lawyers are bringing in character witnesses from Boston." Eleanor's stomach turned. "Who?" "Don't know yet. But honey, it doesn't matter. Whatever they say about who you were, we know who you are." Later, alone in her room, Eleanor pulled out her journal. So much had happened since that first night in Red Butte. She'd arrived as Nell, her father's daughter, Silas's bride-to-be. Now she was... what? Asterisk, I am between worlds. She wrote, asterisk. Neither Eastern lady nor Western woman, neither white nor accepted fully by the Dine. I am standing on a bridge I'm building as I walk, hoping it will hold. Asterisk, but I am standing, and I am building, and maybe that's enough. Tomorrow the trial would continue. Eventually it would end, one way or another. And then she would have to decide the trading post at Cedar Ridge, a life half in Ashki's world. Or... what? She had no other options, but somehow that made the choice feel more real, not less. She thought of the woman in Isaiah's carving arms outstretched, embracing an unknown future. That was her now, balanced between loss and possibility, between who she'd been raised to be and who she was becoming. The desert wind rattled her window, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere out there, Ashki was probably watching the same stars, thinking his own thoughts about bridges and choices and the courage to build something new. Eleanor blew out her lamp and lay back, still fully dressed. The wooden figure clutched in her hand. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be on the edge of transformation, afraid and brave in equal measure, no longer running from her future but walking toward it with open eyes. The naked vulnerability of that dawn by the spring had evolved into something more complex, not covering herself with new lies, but learning to live with uncomfortable truths. She was a woman without a country, without a family, without a clear path forward. But she was also a woman who'd helped stop a massacre, who'd chosen justice over security, who'd learned that courage sometimes meant simply continuing to exist when everything familiar had been stripped away. And that, perhaps, was its own kind of strength. A year had passed since the trial that sent Silas Crow to federal prison. Eleanor stood at the edge of Cedar Ridge, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of gold and amber. The trading post behind her was already stirring to life, May brewing coffee in the kitchen they'd built together, Isaiah tending to the horses, and the sound of children's laughter as both Navajo and settler families began arriving for the weekly market. The transformation hadn't been easy. After Silas's conviction, there had been threats, attempts to burn them out, bitter words from those who'd profited from the old ways. But there had been more who welcomed change, families tired of conflict, traders who saw prosperity in cooperation rather than exploitation. "The water delegation will be here soon," Ashki said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He wore a mixture of traditional and practical clothing, as he always had. But now Eleanor recognized the significance of each piece: the turquoise that had belonged to his grandfather, the silver work that told stories she was still learning to read. "Are you ready?" she asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The question is whether they are ready." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "A water-sharing agreement between the railroad, the town, the ranchers, and the dine. It's never been done before." "Most of what we've built here has never been done before," Eleanor reminded him. The trading post at Cedar Ridge had become something unexpected, not just a place of commerce, but a meeting ground. Eleanor kept the books in 3 languages now: English, Spanish, and she was learning Navajo script from Bikea, who had become like a sister to her. The main building housed the store, but they'd added a school where children of all backgrounds learned together, a medical clinic where traditional healers worked alongside a young doctor from Chicago, and a meeting hall where disputes were settled by a council of elders from various communities. "Eleanor," a young voice called out. She turned to see Samuel, Isaiah's grandson, running toward them. The boy had been living with them since his parents died of fever 6 months ago. "The corn is coming up just like you said it would." She ruffled his hair, remembering the experimental fields where they were trying drought-resistant crops, combining Navajo farming wisdom with new techniques from agricultural journals. "That's wonderful. Sam, did you check the water levels?" "Yes, ma'am. Marked it in the book just like you showed me." As the boy ran off, Ashki took her hand. "He's lucky to have you." "We're all lucky to have each other," Eleanor replied, thinking of the strange family they'd assembled. May had sold the inn in Red Butte and invested everything in their venture. Isaiah brought not just his labor but his connections throughout the territory. Hank Doyle, now Sheriff Doyle, ensured their legal agreements were honored. Even some of Silas's former workers had joined them, men who'd chosen conscience over comfort. The sound of approaching wagons drew their attention. The water delegation had arrived: representatives from the railroad company, territorial government, local ranchers, and several Navajo communities. This meeting had been months in the making, Eleanor corresponding with lawyers, officials, and advocates across the territory. "Remember," Ashki said quietly, "some will come in bad faith. They'll smile and make promises they don't intend to keep. Then we'll document everything." Eleanor patted the ledger under her arm. "Every word, every agreement, every promise. And this time, we have federal oversight watching." The meeting lasted hours. In the great hall they'd built from local stone and timber, voices rose and fell in multiple languages. Eleanor translated, mediated, recorded. When tempers flared, and they did, particularly when discussing the sacred sites near the proposed reservoir, she drew on skills learned in Boston, drawing rooms and Navajo councils alike. By afternoon, they had an agreement, not perfect, but workable. Water rights shared based on historical use and current need. The reservoir built with respect for sacred spaces. Revenue from railroad water purchases funding schools and medical facilities for all communities. Most importantly, a permanent council with equal representation to oversee it all. As the delegates departed, May appeared with a bottle she'd been saving. "Elderflower wine," she announced. "From my mother's recipe. Figured today deserved something special." They gathered on the porch as sunset approached their whole extended family. Eleanor looked around at the faces: May pouring wine with steady hands, Isaiah whittling another of his figures, Hank and his new wife Sarah, the schoolteacher from Kansas, who'd answered their advertisement, Bikea teaching Samuel a string game, and Ashki beside her, solid as the mountains themselves. "A toast," May proposed, raising her glass. "To bridges built and boundaries crossed. To water shared and promises kept," Isaiah added. "To justice served, even when it's uncomfortable. From Hank. Eleanor raised her own glass. To home, however we define it, wherever we find it. As they drank, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Old Thomas, the postal carrier, riding hard. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Urgent news rarely meant good things. But Thomas was grinning as he dismounted. "Letter for you, Miss Eleanor, from Washington." With trembling hands, she opened the official envelope. Inside, a letter on congressional letterhead. Asterisk, Miss Whitcomb. The Committee on Indian Affairs has reviewed your proposal for the Cedar Ridge model of cooperative development. We are pleased to inform you that Congress has approved funding for 3 additional sites based on your framework. Furthermore, your documentation of water rights and land agreements will be entered into federal record as legal precedent. Your work proves that prosperity and justice need not be enemies. With highest regards. Eleanor sank into a chair, the letter fluttering from nerveless fingers. Ashki picked it up, read it aloud to the gathering. A cheer went up, but Eleanor could only sit, overwhelmed by what this meant. 3 more sites, May breathed. 3 more places where folks can live together proper-like. It's just the beginning, Eleanor said when she found her voice. But it's something, proof that there's another way. As night fell, the celebrations continued. Musicians appeared: a Mexican guitarist, a freed slave with a harmonica, a Navajo elder with a drum. The music they made had no name, belonged to no single tradition, but it was beautiful in its mingling. Eleanor found herself by the spring where she and Ashki had built their small home. Not the grand house Silas had offered, but something real, made with their own hands and the help of their neighbors. Through the window, she could see her desk where tomorrow she would write letters to the new sites, sharing everything they'd learned about building communities based on respect rather than dominance. "No regrets?" Ashki asked, echoing his question from a year ago. "None," Eleanor said firmly. Then, softer. "Well, 1. I wish my parents could have seen this, could have understood that there's more than one way to be respectable, more than one way to matter. They might not have understood," he said gently. "This world, our world, it asks people to see beyond themselves. Not everyone can do that." A child's laughter drew their attention. Samuel was chasing fireflies with a group of other children, Navajo, Mexican, Anglo, all mixed together. They played with the unconscious ease of those who'd never been taught to hate. "That's why we do this," Eleanor said. "For them. So they grow up in a world where cooperation is normal, where different doesn't mean dangerous." Ashki pulled her close. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only in 3 languages, she teased. "Then let me add a 4th. He kissed her, and for a moment the weight of responsibility lifted. They were just 2 people who'd found each other across impossible odds, who'd built something beautiful from the ruins of old hatred. Later, as the party wound down, Eleanor made her rounds. She helped May clear dishes, listening to the older woman's plans for expanding the store. She sat with Isaiah as he told stories to the children, his voice weaving history and hope together. She checked the next day's schedule with Hank, confirmed the teacher's supply order with Sarah, went over harvest projections with Bikea. Each conversation, each small task, was a thread in the tapestry they were weaving. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just daily work of building something better, but that was enough, more than enough. As the last guests departed and quiet settled over Cedar Ridge, Eleanor stood once more at the edge of the desert. A year ago, she'd been a different person, frightened, desperate, running from a life that was killing her slowly. Now she was part of something larger than herself, rooted in this red earth and vast sky. The stars emerged one by one, ancient lights that had witnessed so much change, so much conflict, but also so much beauty, so much resilience, like the desert itself, like the people who called it home. They endured. "Time for bed," Ashki said, taking her hand. "Tomorrow brings new challenges." "Let them come," Eleanor replied. "We'll meet them the way we've met all the others together." They walked back to their home, past the gardens where corn grew tall, past the school where tomorrow children would learn that different cultures could strengthen rather than threaten each other, past the spring that had witnessed her transformation from frightened bride to woman of purpose. The naked vulnerability of that dawn seemed like a lifetime ago. In its place stood something stronger, not invulnerability, but the courage to be vulnerable with purpose, to strip away pretense and build something true. The water still flowed through the ancient channels, finding its way as it always had, and like that water, Eleanor had found her course not the straight, narrow path she'd been raised to follow, but something wider, deeper, carving new possibilities in an old landscape. Tomorrow would bring new struggles, new obstacles to overcome. There would always be those who preferred the old ways, who saw cooperation as weakness and diversity as threat. But tonight, in this place they'd built with hope and stubbornness and love, anything seemed possible. And that was revolution enough for any lifetime. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps somewhere unexpected. Please share your thoughts in the comments below and tell me where in the world you're experiencing this Wild West adventure. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Tales, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that hype button to help more listeners discover these tales of courage, justice, and transformation in the American frontier. Your support helps keep these stories alive and reaching new audiences who appreciate authentic historical fiction with heart.